the cloud, and we are recording to the cloud. So Athena, this is your show.
I think we're going to start with Boza Rivers, who is a hero in my book. He is my hero in all ways possible. So I think it's all yours, Boza Rivers, the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce Art and Culture Committee Chair, and much, much more.
Good afternoon or good evening, depending on how you're looking at this. On behalf of the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce and its Arts and Culture Committee, Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance, and the Harlem Arts Alliance, in partnership with the Borough President, Gail Brewer, we're happy to have you participate in this second conference call for arts and culture. What's very important since our last call is that more than ever, the small and mid-sized arts and culture organizations throughout the entire city, but mostly important between 96th Street and Marble Hill, it is important that we be recognized for the work and the contributions that we make in arts and culture. Our communities depend on us. We've been very creative that our doors are closed, but we are doing Zoom calls, we're doing programming, we're doing a lot of virtual things, but again, we just want to share with our elected officials and invited guests that the work that we do needs to be validated by their support. And with that, I want to say again, you'll be able to ask questions and get answers and have a really robust dialogue between all participants. Thank you.
Working on this project with you and Athena Moore from our office is an honor. And there's no question that the artists in Northern Manhattan, particularly, are the backbone of our city. Without art and without their amazing contribution, we don't have a city, we don't have DNA, and we certainly don't have economic development, whether you're small or large. So from my perspective, as somebody who's been working on this topic of what should the arts be and how do they contribute, my small piece today, and I know others are going to ask questions and contribute, is these artists individually and as a group need money. There's no way they don't have a third-party reimbursement. They have been supported in the past by the city council, and we'll hear more about that, by the state and by the federal government and by philanthropy, but they need all of that more than ever. I just want to say in Northern Manhattan, we're very fortunate because we'll hear more from the Empowerment Zone and the work that they do in supporting artists, both by the head of the Empowerment Zone and by my long-term friend, Berta Ray Roosevelt. And I know that they will continue to help. How can artists and cultural groups get money in the next federal PPP? That's something that we should work on. We got hurt by feds just in terms of small groups and artists and nonprofits in the last third round. Hopefully in the fourth round, we'll be more supportive. And one way, of course, is to work with groups like Carver Bank, like credit unions, and even somebody suggested look to banks outside of New York City. With all due respect, the big banks have not been supportive. Second thing I want to say in terms of philanthropy, my understanding is that the large COVID consortium with, Robin Hood and Bloomberg and others, the Mellon Foundation, the Doris Duke Foundation, I believe that their applications, 846 of them closed last night. However, I know that Northern Manhattan was in there, people applied, and we'll have to see what the outcome is. I also want to state that there is another organization, USA Artists, which I'm sure you know. Traditionally, they've only given to individuals in mid-career, but now they're giving $5,000 to almost any kind of an individual artist. And then we'll hear more about ways that we can be supportive. But for me, the main issue is these cultural organizations, whether you're an individual or a group, have to be supported. And the only way to do that is putting together our collective support ideas and make sure they get what they need. So thank you, Boza Rivers, and thank you everyone who cares about cultural and the arts on this phone call and elsewhere. It's just an honor to be here. And thank you, Athena Moore, for helping to put this together, and I'll turn it back over to you.
How are you?
Thank you. The next we have, after the borough president, is Neria from Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance. Are you there, Neria?
Yes, I'm here. Good evening, everyone. Buenas noches. Thanks to the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce and the Harlem Arts Alliance for inviting us to be part of this program, and of course to Gail Brewer. It's truly an honor. My name is Nidia Leiva Gutierrez, and I am the acting executive director of the Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance, also known as NOMA. We are a nonprofit arts service organization that for the last 14 years has striven to cultivate, support, and promote the work of artists and arts organizations in Manhattan. And by now, I think we're all keen to the many ways that COVID has upended our worlds and injected a chronic level of anxiety into both our personal and professional lives. The last time we were together, we struggled to process what had just hit our great city. We posed the question, what is this? And we shared stories about how COVID had forced us to cancel or postpone our events, had rocked our carefully crafted plans for programs and events, and created real fears about the financial health and futures of our organizations. Since that time, we at NOMA have turned our attention from the what is this to what now? And simply put, our what now is that we, like so many of you, continue to work. Since we last spoke, we have moved all of our programming online, including our flagship, very public and very well attended art stroll, the Paseo de las Artes. We have hosted online artist talk, and we continue these over the next several months. We have hired a local curator who is developing 3 online virtual exhibitions around the theme of community and healing. And after only 1 week, our call for submissions has yielded over 20 applications for participation in these shows. People are eager, they are thirsty to participate. We have offered and we will continue to offer technical assistance workshops to working artists who now are forced to reimagine how they promote and disseminate their work, and how they can find the funding to do so. And this is so important. And next week, we will launch our virtual artist open studios, which will be sponsored by local restaurants whose delivery and pickup options we will also help to promote. And finally, we have remained committed to working with our community arts partners and friends in Northern Manhattan, several of whom I'm so happy to see are here tonight, to find ways to collaborate and to share resources so that we can not only continue to exist, but so that we can strive. Independently, yes, but also together. But here's what I want you to know. What we need to do now is to move from our what now moment to our what is next. And the answers here don't just depend on our commitment, our dedication, and our passion for what we do naturally as arts organizations. We need to know how our philanthropic, civic, and national entities are committed to supporting the arts. How can funders help us as we flex collectively our creative muscles towards sustaining and growing organizations, making them stronger and making them last? Many of our organizations are hanging in the balance. And we need, even in this moment of such great uncertainty, commitment to our continued existence and our relevance. We expect to all be here when this is over, and I know you all do too. And so our what's next has never been more important. Thank you so much for listening.
Joyous?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you first and foremost for joining us this evening, participants and speakers. I'm Joyce Pierce. I'm the Executive Director of the Harlem Arts Alliance. And thank you, Naira from NOMA, for that uplifting, truly, truly uplifting message. And what the purpose of this call is today is to help with that's what's next, where we're moving next. And just to reiterate, please, please, please share your questions, comments, and concerns in the chat. This forum is really an opportunity for us to, communicate together and across all lines of interdisciplinary and political lines. So let's just take advantage of that opportunity today. And I hope that this call will be an opportunity for us to keep our spirits uplifted and to keep each of us informed about what's going on. So glad you're all here.
Thank you. Back to you, Nadia.
I'm so happy and so pleased to introduce 4 fellow community partners who represent a real cross-section of Washington Heights and Inwood arts organizations. And so it gives me great pleasure, and I'm happy to do this and an honor to do this, to introduce the founding executive director of the People's Theater Project, Mino Lora. Mino.
Thank you, Nidia. Good evening, everyone. Buenas noches a todos. I'm very grateful to be here and to be representing our amazing, vibrant community. As Gail said, what I firmly believe is the backbone of New York City and arts and culture. And I know council member may say Queens too, and I agree. But such an important part of who we are as a community. So People's Theater Project is a theater and social justice organization. We are an immigrant and led organization from top to bottom to really that creates theater with our immigrant community. Our mission is to really humanize our stories and elevate them to the place where we believe they need to be. So during this time, we've continued to do that work, and as an organization grounded on values of equity, paying our staff, our immigrant staff has been key, and our artists. So we were committed to doing that, and we were able to do that with the support of some of our foundation funders, and really going out there and asking. So one thing that I'll say is being creative, because we've transferred all of our entire spring show on the census. The Future Is Now has now become digital, and will be launching next Friday at 2 p.m. and then will be shared all over with all of our census partners. All of our programs, we work with over 900 young people between schools and our academy, have gone remote. So we trained our team, we trained our families. We've helped connect them to resources of devices. We've partnered with NOMA. We've brought together a lot of arts organizations are continuing to do that in different ways, starting a new show online, Uptown Palante, where we're going to be highlighting what our community is doing, the stories of resilience of our community. And I think that's something that arts and artists, we have that skill. We have those skills, all of us do. That is the power that we have, the power of stories. And especially in moments like this, and in the moments of what is next, as we heal through this trauma, as our children heal through this trauma, the arts are going to be essential for us as a city to move forward. And you can count on us artists, and I don't mean to be having all of us in this group, every single one, to make sure that that happens. But in order for that to happen, the funds need to be there, because artists need to be paid, need to live. And I think one of the questions that I really look at, it's been amazing to see the galvanizing of support for this crisis time over the next 3 months, and federal, city, foundation. So that's great, but we need to really think about, especially in city council, and how are those discretionary funds, the DCLA funds for FY21, for FY22, because theater may look different, because we may not be able to gather 150 people in a room. It doesn't mean theater will stop existing. It doesn't mean orchestra music will stop existing, but it may be an audience of 5. And that's fine. 5 at a time, we will do it. So I think it's about how do we look at how arts can continue to transform in a different way, and how does the city continue to prioritize that, city council continue to prioritize that, whether it's Coalition Theaters of Color and CASA and Su Casa, all the amazing things that DCLA has been leading with the support from government. I look forward to seeing how do we adapt together? How are we creatively adapting to the new reality, understanding the value of the arts? So I look forward to continue to listen tonight and be in community with all of you. Así que gracias.
Thanks so much, Mino. I think those, those are such clear and important messages: resilience, creativity, the power of stories, and the transformative nature of art. And, we couldn't agree more with all of that. And so I wanted now to introduce our next speaker, the founder and general coordinator of Word Up Community Bookshop, Librería Comunitaria, Veronica Liu, who will speak to us next. Veronica?
Hi, thank you to the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, the Manhattan Borough President's Office, Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance, and Harlem Arts Alliance for convening us all here today. I'm Veronica from Word Up Community Bookshop. We're a brick and mortar bookstore and community art space located at the corner of Amsterdam and 165th Street when we're open. We're a nonprofit. We're a collectively run organization and largely volunteer staff, though we do have a small paid staff that are also on payroll for now. We started as a pop-up shop that was incubated by NOMA, and we're now about to celebrate our 9th birthday. So over all of these years, our thing has been about gathering people, as many as possible, all the time. When we closed our doors to customers on March 13th, we'd had to cancel more than 50 events and workshop meetings that were taking place at that space for just that next month. It also meant the cancellation of 20 offsite events, including conferences all over the city, for which we're the bookseller, and as well as 3 large-scale events that we had hoped that would make enough of a profit to cover a substantial portion of our operating budget the rest of the year. To offset this loss of our in-person customers, we've implemented as quickly as possible, like additional e-commerce capabilities so we can ship books to you directly. We have digital audiobooks, ebooks, etc. And working online, as everyone's been trying to pivot with their events, we've been able to pivot 2 of those large-scale events. One is Julia Alvarez and Edwidge Danzicat, which is, will be introduced by Angie Cruz. It's taking place next Tuesday, April 28th on Zoom. It is co-sponsored by Dominican Writers and Border of Lights. We're also doing our best to still implement all the things that we were meant to do, if it were live with our DCLA funding, including live interpretation into Spanish and Haitian Creole, and I'll close captioning if we can as well. And then the other event like that is Elizabeth Acevedo's book launch taking place on Tuesday, May 5th, also on Zoom and also co-organized with Dominican Writers and Mami Chula Social Club. So these events will have far fewer people than an in-person event would have, but it's something. And we've done smaller events too, and story times and stuff like that. But last week we had one, we've been experimenting. We had last week a 6-author fiesta that had 200 people in attendance. But we've been trying our best to also share this moment with other people. We had 2 other bookstores we'd invited to join for that big event because they're also community spaces that can't gather people at this time. So that's one of the questions I have, or 2 of the questions. One are what kind of spatial considerations we will need to make when we reopen. Is this we're going to have to get a drive-through window, like a walk-through window at Word Up? As we cram as many people in as we can all the time, but we'll have to change that once we start opening up. But also the fact that we're a very casual space that youth come to all the time, but we're not explicitly a youth organization, I think is another thing we've been thinking a lot about, because a lot of youth come to us because we're not a youth organization in some ways, because they like the interaction of different generations and not being pigeonholed into this thing, which, there's still that, but there's just not specific funding for that, often where it's a place where, a lot of our staff is, our collective members are interns, and a lot of them have been volunteers since they were 16 and are now in their mid-20s. We've been around that long, they've stayed with us that long. So just that as a consideration too, that there are so many students that we've worked with who've been so challenged with either not having, even if they have a device, not quite the right conditions for being able to take part in their education at this time in the same way. And when we welcome them back in through our doors, what more can we do for them to sort of help bolster that, the sort of out of classroom education that we were able to provide before in some way. Those are things on my mind. Also, that, you know, books are like food for the mind, but we also are balancing that with the fact that we know people also more at this moment, like more literally need food. So how can we just, you know, work on that and say that we need the funds for this, but also we don't want too many of your funds because we know we'd rather you have, you know, a meal and a home and, you know, just all of that, which I'm sure is on all of your minds too.
Thanks so much, Veronica. I think it's so important to think about the young people, you know. That's what we're turning this over to them. And so the logistics of how we do that and what that looks like, I think has never been sort of more important to consider. So I wanted to move now to introduce our next speaker. She is the Assistant Director of the Hispanic Society. I am honored to introduce my colleague and friend, Margaret Connors McQuaid. Margaret.
Thank you. Good evening. I just want to take a moment to thank this group for organizing this meeting and for including me in the discussion. As Nadia said, my name is Margaret Connors McQuaid. I'm the Assistant Director of the Hispanic Society Museum and Library, which is located on Audubon Terrace on 155th Street and Broadway. We hold the largest collection of Hispanic art in the world, and it's really a gem of an institution for New York City. Like most of us, Hispanic Society has been affected by this crisis. We had begun design work on a major capital project, which for the moment has been suspended. In the meantime, my colleagues have been super creative and working hard to stay connected and engaged with the wider public through our website, newsletter, social media. We've developed a number of programs. We've also provided our educational workshops that we usually hold in the schools are now available on our website. Our spring concert, which has always been a wonderful free program for the community, thanks to a grant from the Department of Cultural Affairs, will be held virtually. And beginning on May 5th, we'll begin a series of live conversations with, about works in our collection in conversation with curators and our chairman, Philippe de Montebello. But to build on what Nidia posed, what's next, I'm interested really in using this meeting to shout out to other cultural organizations in Upper Manhattan to see how we might work together. Nidia and I have already begun to talk about collaborating on different types of programs that enrich the community with the arts while also supporting local artists. And my hope is to expand collaborations with other cultural organizations, not only remotely, but also when we're all able to reopen. As we talked about earlier, you know, what will that look like? But I think there's a lot to learn from one another, and I think there may be a way, I know there's a way that we can share our talents and our resources to work together. And I also think that there could be an opportunity for us to share our talents with some of the local schools who are really challenged with educating our children remotely. So with that, I really encourage you to reach out, and I know we'll continue to have these conversations that Nidia has been really wonderful, and Joanna to organize. So if you have thoughts or interest in collaborating, I really look forward to working with all of you. So thank you so much for inviting me today.
Thanks so much, Margaret. And, you know, it's such a great model, these sort of, you know, big institutions, small institutions, sort of this idea of us all sort of coming together, big and small, and to help sustain one another. I really think that we can find strength in that, right? That's how we help support each other and our communities. So we have one more speaker from the arts and culture that I wanted to introduce tonight, and that's Aaron Sims, who is the executive producer of Inwood Artworks. Aaron, you want to close up here for us?
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting the, I think we're the northernmost of Northern Manhattan arts organization in the group. So thanks for including us down the hinterlands of Harlem, so to speak. It's been a really trying time for everybody, and so I don't really think we need to go through a ton of things, but Inwood Artworks, if you didn't know, our mission is to create and curate professional performing and visual arts in Inwood and its surrounding community. And we've collaborated with many of you I see here on your faces on the Zoom. I'm not so interested in kind of rehashing the past, so to speak. I mean, we had our Inwood Film Festival cancel. The parks just stopped all production, so we're going to have our Filmworks Al Fresco canceled. And so we're in the community making business through art. That's what we do. We use art as a platform to bring people together. So we know we're facing a lot of challenges right now, and that's just the way it is, and everyone's has their tale of woe. I'm most interested in considering how I can be useful right now. That's my question to myself as an art maker and as a producer and a creative person. How can I be useful? And so given the fact that our programming has somewhat been wiped out, and we're not so much into the creating content for content's sake to be relevant online, so to speak, we kind of stick to our guns. We do have things in line coming up. So we're gonna have to figure out how, and we're very small, we're volunteer led, so it's very difficult to generate something out of nothing. So we're trying to figure out how to be useful, how to stay relevant, and yet also in a meaningful way. So we're pushing out just our positive content we have, showing short films from the film festival on our website and our Facebook page, and we have some programs in the works we hope to announce next couple of weeks. We have our filmmaker fund, so we're going to be giving grants to artists like we did last year as well, putting money in artists' pockets, because I think that's very important right now. So we're going to continue doing that. So if we're going to go out, we're going to go out the bang and give the money to the artists. That's the way I look at it. I mean, my big question is scalability into the future. Looking forward, I'm looking to September and next year's, scalability, and which leads to accessibility. When we do events, what does that look like? When we produce an off-Broadway play and the seating is 150 people, or if you're in the park, that's going to affect our earned revenue if you're selling tickets. And what's that going to change to our financial model, not just our budgets, but also too is in how we scale and produce events. Not to mention just social conditioning with people psychologically being bent out of shape for having been shelter in place for so long and being aware of being in proximity to each other. I'm thinking about how we're going to be able to produce things and be able to afford things in the future, because I think we have to be nimble. Yes, we have to be adaptable, or not, obviously. And so that's what's on my mind right now. And if we have a 150 seat theater and we can only put 50 seats out, do we have to raise ticket prices? And how does that affect accessibility? Do rich people only be able to afford the tickets? I mean, there's, if you're in the parks department, you can only do so many things. That's how do you relegate yourself? And there's a lot of questions to be had how we're moving forward, and every day we're obviously learning new things. But I think that's where I'm at right now, is just figuring out, keep asking questions of how we can be useful, how we can keep ourselves in the game, and yet also be true to our mission and also stay accessible to our multicultural community.
Okay. Donna Walker-Kuhn and the Borough President.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for your wonderful participation. And we're so happy that you joined this conversation this evening. Listening to the speakers, it is just so impressive, the passion, the commitment, the tenacity that we all have as artists and art makers, art curators and art protectors to make sure we can continue to do our work. And I find this such a rich forum, for us to discuss and share, convene, plan, and then execute what's next. Before I introduce the next 4 guest speakers, I wanted to offer a perspective to your question, Aaron, when you asked about, just what you've been thinking about and how this next chapter of civilization will look like. I have many favorite writers, but one of them is Arundhati Roy, a female Indian writer, and she did an interview for the Financial Times recently. I wanted to just share a quote that she wrote, because I find it so inspiring. It's very brief. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So just wanted to share that. Thank you. So our first guest speaker, and I don't know, Madam Borough President, if she wanted to introduce them. I don't see her. That would be Councilman Van Bramer.
Yes.
Okay.
Unmute, Gail, you're muted.
I don't know how to get rid of it.
Gail, you are, oh,
You were.
Don't touch, go ahead, no.
Gail, there you go.
Okay, so I am honored to introduce Jimmy Van Bremer because we served together in the city council. He was first elected in 2009 and then re-elected every 4 years. He has been a longtime member of the budget negotiation team, which is a team that I served on. I know how important it is, and it does mean that he has input into the city's budget. I think the reason, and we're so honored that he's here tonight, is that for many years he has been chair of the city council's cultural affairs, libraries, and international intergroup relations committee. I don't know what the third one is, but I sure do know what the first two are. And one of the reasons, of course, is that he was the intergov head of the Queens Public Library for many years. So he really, really knows libraries, and goodness knows the cultural organizations he has also been a champion of, bringing in over $1 billion during his tenure. He has also served as the majority leader of the city council during his second term, beginning 2014 until the end of 2017. And he's also married to Dan Hendrick, whom I also am a big fan of. So I really appreciate the fact that he's here and his knowledge. And I hope you can see, Jimmy, I think you can, that the quality and the breadth of experience of this group of artists in all shapes and forms is really, really broad and incredibly important. So we look forward to your words, and we're all trying to work on this together. And thank you so much, Councilmember, for joining us.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me just say that when Gail Brewer calls, it's very hard to say no to Gail Brewer. And I am calling in from my mother's apartment in Astoria, Queens, where I'm helping as part of the care network to make sure that my mom stays healthy through all of this. But this call is important to me. This community is important to me. And when Gail Brewer calls, I say yes. So, and I was grateful to actually listen to all the artists and arts organizations make some introductions and talk about some of the points that need to be addressed. I'll say a few things that I think are relevant to the times that we're in, but I know that people are going to have questions, and really I want to be responsive to as much as I can. First, let me just say I wish everyone as much calm and peace as is possible in this moment. And my heart breaks for all of our cultural organizations, particularly the small ones, whose very existence is threatened by where we are at right now. I know that many of you are thinking about whether or not you're even going to be able to stay open. And I've already heard from some small theater companies saying that they will not reopen because they can't see a world post-COVID-19 where people will go to small theaters and enjoy what they were once so desperate to enjoy. I hope that's not true. But in terms of the realities of where we're at, I've been the chair of the Cultural Affairs Committee. This is my 11th year as chair of the committee. So arts and culture and libraries are my life's passion and my life's work. And it is absolutely my job to fight for every single arts organization and artist in the city of New York. We've done some good work. right at this very moment. We sit in a city where the budget for the Department of Cultural Affairs is the highest that it's ever been in the history of the city of New York. And yet we know there are issues with equity and access to that funding that persist. But I do want to say at the City Council, we have done some incredible things. The Coalition of Theaters of Color, which I know by looking at the comments is important to several members already on the call. That funding has more than doubled in the last couple of years, and the number of groups eligible to receive that funding has increased fairly dramatically. A few years ago, with Melissa Mark Viverito, I created the Cultural Immigrant Initiative, which started at $1 million and is now at $7.5 million, specifically aimed at organizations that serve immigrant communities and have budgets of below less than $1 million. CASA, the Cultural After School Adventure Program, a program that Gail knows very well. When Gail left the City Council, that budget was at $5 million. Today, CASA sits at almost $20 million. We have increased it dramatically. And of course, the Cultural Development Fund has increased funding as well. And I want to also just recognize that under Tom Finkelpearl, our former commissioner, and with my encouragement, there was additional money that was allocated with additional funding going to the smallest groups. And that funding was tiered to benefit much more so the smaller organizations. Having said all of that, I know there is so much more to do in making sure that smaller organizations, particularly organizations led by people of color and serving communities of color, absolutely need to be supported much more greatly. But there's work to be done. We are at a very difficult moment as it relates to the budget for culture and the arts. I will say that I've had a lot of phone calls with the mayor and the speaker, the city council, members of our federal delegation, and I bring up this at every single moment and every single call, and Gail knows that the only two things I ever talk about are culture and libraries and fighting for them. So right now, in the budget cuts that the mayor has made, over $2 billion in cuts, culture and the arts has essentially been held harmless to date, but that could change. And of course, we have no guarantees about what the next year's budget will look like. But I want everyone to know that I believe that if we're ever going to get out of this crisis, culture and the arts and artists and arts organizations are going to lead us through this dark time. And I've said that to the mayor, that if we're gonna see a time where New York City is coming out of this, your arts and culture organizations are gonna be the ones that actually allow you to do it. You can't do it without culture and the arts leading the way. So I'm gonna keep fighting. There are a lot of answers that we don't know yet, but I wanted to be here, A, because the borough president invited me to, B, I serve the entire city, not just my beloved Queens, where I'm calling you from, and I know so many of the groups in this group chat are doing amazing work, and I want you to know that I'm here for you as well. So that's just an overview. We're actually holding our own right now, which some people feel is hard to believe, given that the Department of Education has received hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts, and SYEP has been zeroed out, and so many incredibly important programs have been decimated, and DCLA has been essentially held harmless. Let me also just mention, this is also a moment of transition for the Department of Cultural Affairs. As many of you know, Commissioner Finkelpearl left at the end of last year. Kathy Hughes has been our acting commissioner, but starting on Monday, we will have a new commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs, and Gonzalo Casals, who some of you may know, is an amazing, progressive, queer, Latinx artist and arts administrator that comes from El Museo, but also from Leslie Lohman, where he was the last director. And Gonzalo's been very public. He was very sick for the last several weeks, but he is back. I spoke to him today. We are talking regularly, and I believe that with Gonzalo as the next commissioner, we're going to have a truly progressive person at the helm. Of course, he is not free to make all the decisions. He reports to the mayor of the city of New York and the deputy mayor, Vicky Bean. But we are also at this very, very moment of crisis, in a moment of great transition, where on Monday, Gonzalo will start as the commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs. But he's a great friend. He lives in Jackson Heights, and I was a big supporter of him becoming the next commissioner. So I expect to have a great working relationship with him. And I know he cares about small cultural organizations. I know he cares about supporting communities of color, in immigrant communities in particular. So with all of that, I will just say thank you again for having me on the call. And I'm happy to at least attempt to answer questions that folks may have.
Thank you.
So,
President, are you speaking? Oh, I didn't want to interrupt her speaking. Thank you very much, Councilman Bramer. We're going to do Q&A, I believe, after. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so shall we go to our next guest speaker? Madam Borough President, did you want to introduce Mr. Wu?
Introduce Mr. Wu.
Is he here?
Is Mr. Wu on?
I just got off the phone and he said he was dialing in, so.
All right. Do you want to go to somebody else first, or do you want to go with Tim Wu?
Why don't you go ahead? I think he just dialed in. Yes, Mr. Wu? Okay, Gail, you can proceed with the next speaker.
All right, so go ahead.
No. Okay, so let me just give you the.
I believe we have the president of UMass Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, Mr. Blair Duncan. Blair, can you join us? Yes, no? No, Blair?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. Can you see me and hear me now?
We can hear and see you, Blair.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Athena. Thank you, Voza, for inviting myself here. You probably all are much more familiar with Verdi Roosevelt, so I'm pleased to be able to join you and maybe get the same recognition that she gets now.
Just everybody knows that's Gail Brewer. He's channeling me. Don't listen to him. He's wonderful also, Blair. Go ahead.
Okay. So, UMass is a, strong supporter of the cultural arts organizations. One of the things that we've been doing with our existing grantees is to really try to see how we can make the grant agreements more flexible, to permit funding to flow to them. We recognize that this is going to be a long-term impact on cultural organizations, and while we're looking what happens in the next few months, we know that we'll be facing many of these issues really 6 months to 12 months from now. So we have to keep an eye on just kind of the broader impact, but in the short term, what we're looking at is being very flexible with our grantees. In addition, many know, in particular some of the smaller arts organizations have received grants from us through our partnership with the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. And we're working also with LMCC to make sure that those grantees, those awardees that were selected for the 2020 year, who are not going to be able to make their presentations for the summer and probably for the fall, nevertheless have access to the funding to carry them through because we think that while, you know, it was really out of their control in terms of the ability to present, and some have had expenditures and some are going to be looking at ways to use that funding to help them in the subsequent year. We're also working on some internal programs at UMass. We have a board meeting on Monday. We'll have more information about that going forward. But, you know, I am pleased to be able to just share with you some of those things that we're doing. And we are, you know, looking forward to kind of continuing to strengthen our relationship, both with the individual and unincorporated grantees that we work with through LMCC, as well as those who are in our catchment area. And I see a number of familiar faces of those who have actually been recipients of our new grant initiative. So that's what I have to report. Verdery and I are here, so we're happy to kind of maintain communication with everyone. And I thank you for inviting us to be part of this collective discussion.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Shall we go back to Mr. Wu now? Is he on, Athena?
He did say that he was dialed in, so I'm not sure. Mr. Wu, can you hear us? Yes, it just says he just joined. Go ahead, Gail. Would you introduce
How's it going?
him?
Hi, how's it going? I'll be right over here.
Hi. Yes, 1 second, Mr. Wu. Go ahead, Gail.
Sure. So I am honored to introduce Tim Wu. As you know, he is a professor at Columbia Law School, and he is well known in my world, and I think in Clayton Banks's, for being the person who coined the phrase network neutrality. He has served in the Federal Trade Commission. He has served in the New York Office of the Attorney General, and he launched a successful lawsuit against Time Warner Cable for falsely advertising their Broadway speeds. He went to McGill University, where he graduated, and then Harvard Law School.
Yeah.
Just recently, 2 days ago, he wrote, as he does often, I am his #1 fan in the New York Times. I read every word that Tim Wu writes, but just 2 days ago, he wrote an article, op-ed, because he is a regular contributor, called The Small Business Aid and the Fact That It Has Been a Fiasco on the PPP. And the reason I mention that is, to his credit, when the federal government first announced that they were going to give out funding, he marshaled his amazing students at Columbia Law School and said to me, would you like them to help some of the small organizations get funding, be they nonprofit or for-profit? And he's been continuing to do that along with the folks at the Columbia Business School. So needless to say, he did run for office in 2014 for lieutenant governor. He didn't win, but I think that was quite an experience for Professor Wu, and I love that it was an experience. He joined my world for a little while. We were able to share all the stories. But I'm so honored that he's here, and I hope he'll talk about a couple of things. This is just my personal preference, but you should talk about what you want. Obviously, we have on the call many phenomenal Northern Manhattan arts organizations, small and large, mostly small. And they've been brought together by folks from Harlem and also folks from Upper Manhattan in Washington Heights and Inwood. And there's a couple of challenges. Of course, it's funding, #1. Second one, though, that I know hasn't been discussed, and Clayton Banks might join me in suggesting it. Here we are, 2020, with what's next. And some people have mentioned what they're thinking about or what their questions are, what next. So one of the questions I have, not only help us about funding ideas and challenges and what's next in the fourth proposal for funding, which I guess just got passed by the House a few minutes ago. But what can we do on the technology front? Is there some way, when you listen to these amazing performances and artists and all the work that they do, is there something called a firewall so that people would have to pay for some of this? Or do we often have to think it has to be free online, and then we have to figure out how we're going to sit in an auditorium that had 150 people, as Aaron said, and now only has, 30, and how do we charge for that? So I'm just wondering, I know you thought about all these things. So from funding to technology to the future, and thank you for all your work with the organizations that you and your students contribute to trying to get funding. I remember you said to me at the very beginning, Gail, this is not gonna work. I know exactly who's getting the funding and I know who's not getting the funding. So you're always good at proposing or suggesting what's gonna happen in the future, even if it's bad news. So Professor Wu, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you, Gail. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me here. I'm sorry that I'm here late. I was, like a lot of people, I have childcare has become a major, it's always been a part of my life, but is now a mainstay with homeschooling and everything. I want to particularly thank Gail. You know, when I did run for office, there was, because we were challenging the governor, there was there was this idea that you weren't supposed to talk to us, but Gail broke that rule a couple times, and I appreciated it. And it was a lot of fun to run for office. So let me tell you about what I'm doing, and then let me try and get to some of that arts and tech question. So yes, as everyone knows, there's a program that's designed to help small business and small nonprofits being run by the federal government. The name of it is Payroll Protection Plan, and it's had a lot of problems. The main problem, even from the beginning, is that they decided that small business was anyone from 500 employees or under, and if you were a restaurant or hotel, it didn't matter how many employees you were a small business. So this has been the news. There's this design of the program has put small nonprofits, yoga studios, nail salons, little local grocers in a competition with Shake Shack, Ruth Chris Steakhouse, companies with 450 employees in a race for funds. And it might not surprise you to hear that's been tough. I have a group of about 40 students now who are actively trying to help small, and I mean 15 or fewer employees, real small business, real small nonprofits with this process. And if you are a New York City small business, if you're fewer than 15, you may have applied yourself, you may not need us, but if you want to, some help trying to apply for these funds, they're mostly designed to protect payroll, utilities, other things like that. You can let me know. We have an intake email, which I'll say, I probably should put it out there somewhere in a chat, Columbia PPP at gmail.com, and I'll put it in the chat later. So that's what we're doing, and like I said, it's been a slog. We have got people some money, but it is a fight out there, and even with our help, it is a giant race for money, and it's about to start again today. So just want to tell you that they've reserved some more money this time around. I think I haven't had time to check the last numbers, but I think it's 30 billion or something supposedly for smaller groups, because people did realize that having 400 employee organizations fighting with nail salons and arts institutions was a bit of a mismatch and a ridiculous situation. But anyway, we're fighting that fight, and we have students helping people out. Going forward, Gail raised some interesting questions about the future of the arts, revenue. I am a strong believer that people should pay for stuff. The artists need to be paid. We're in a time where I think the early days of the internet, well, everything will be free, that'll be fine, and you'll become famous. I mean, that's fine for like a teenager on TikTok, but if you need to pay your bills or, support a family or anything, have a life as an artist or a writer or a creator, you need something more. And I think I think we're in a moment where it's a good time to put a lot of pressure on tech to figure out better funding models for small artists, small community groups, that kind of thing. And to say that, putting your stuff on YouTube just isn't an answer anymore. Some good news is a lot of money is being spent on television and the arts, and there is a lot of federal funding running around, but most of it you know, there's, as usual, is going to people with the best lobbyists, which tends to be, you know, old industries, those who are able to lobby hard. The airlines are taking home almost $40 billion in grants and loans. So it is a challenge, but I think the time has come. I think there's a lot of people wanting to support the arts right now. And it's a good reminder of a call for technologists to really figure out ways of supporting the arts in small ways. I mean, people have tried a lot of things, but there's no question in my mind the whole like put something up there and hope you get a lot of clicks is not the mandate for the future. And it's particularly urgent, as Gail said, in a time when you don't have people coming into art spaces now. You have to rely on a virtual experience, and that just doubles or triples the challenge. So anyway, I'm open to any questions or anything anyone wants to discuss. Do you have any questions for me, Gail?
We're going to take them at the end.
We're going to take some in a little while.
Terrific.
Yes, we always have lots of questions for you, Tim.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wu. We have our final guest speaker, and that is Clayton Banks, who is founder and CEO of Silicon Harlem. Clayton, take it away. I know he's on.
Clayton, you are unmuted.
Yes, no?
So why don't we go to questions?
We'll
and we can come back. We can come back.
Yes. So now we're doing Q&A with Athena Moore and Joyous Pierce.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you for all of the speakers who have spoken before. Clayton just responded that he is there.
Yeah.
So let's see, Clayton, can we try that again?
Can't hear him.
Okay, we will continue and we'll figure out that technical issue. Thank you for your patience. We just want to open it up for questions. We have a series of questions that have been shared in advance. Is that Clayton?
Yep. That is Clayton.
Okay, let's go ahead. Thank you, Clayton. Would you please go ahead?
I will be brief. I had to challenge my tech skills to get back on here. And I've got an unstable connection, Gail. We've lost him again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will come back as soon as we hear him again. The questions that we have.
I blame the broadband companies.
I do too. It's crazy,
better,
but
man.
Oh,
you're back. You're back. Good.
I am. I might end up going back and in and out here for a minute, but I will just quickly say the tech industry, as Noel knows, who's on. I will answer that, and that is the tech industry is unreliable. I'm going to switch up and go on to audio through my mobile so that it's a lot less of an issue. But continue with the questions and I'll come back.
Okay, no problem. So for the participants who are on the call, we have invited everyone to put their questions into the chat. There are some questions that we'd like to start with that were submitted in advance. So the first question is, approximately how long does the city realistically foresee public programming and convening large groups to be canceled? Is the city going to make funds available specifically for arts and culture nonprofit organizations in predominantly Black and Latino areas? Who would like to take that for starters?
I think council member to start with, the council member would be the best. And we also, I know that we had Assembly Member Inez Dickens on also. So maybe the two of them could help us with either the state or the city edicts. Council member?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you.
I think the first part of the question is clear to all of us. in terms of how long we're going to be with this level of disruption to and really closure of virtually every cultural organization there is. That is a question that we all want to know the answer to, and I can't say that I know it for sure. We hope it comes soon, but my fear is that it's going to take a lot longer than any of us would like for us to return to any kind of normalcy when it comes to being able to open all of our cultural and arts organizations again and welcome audiences in whatever sizes that we can. And I think the second part of that question was geared towards specific funding towards organizations of color and specific earmarking and funding streams. And I can just repeat again, we've done a lot of work, particularly with the council initiatives, with doubling the Coalition of Theaters of Color and greatly increasing the Cultural Immigrant Initiative. But there is certainly more that can and should be done, and I am hopeful that Gonzalo Casals is the new Cultural Affairs Commissioner, who believes very deeply in equity, is going to be a partner in that effort. But you know, certainly that's part of my mission, and part of my drive here is not just to save the budget for cultural organizations, which is mission number one, from having it be decimated at this time, but then the funding that we do have to make sure that it is distributed across the city to every zip code, and to make sure that organizations of color get their fair share.
Thank you so much. I just want to add that while the council member is speaking, Sade Litcock from the National Black Theater wanted to ask the question about the council's initiative regarding the Coalition of Theaters of Color. It's the only safety net in the 5 boroughs for this group of theaters. And she has a question about that vis-a-vis the immigrant initiative, which is 3 times the size of the Coalition of Theaters of Color. So wanted to know more about how that came to grow over time, and what support might be available for the safety net of the Coalition of Theaters of Color.
Sure. So the increase to the Coalition of Theaters of Color last year was the greatest in the history of the initiative, and one that I fully supported and worked with Lori Cumbo on. And we've seen smaller increases, but last year there was a massive, a real doubling of the project. And an expansion of that. And the Cultural Immigrant Initiative is one that I initiated as the chair with Melissa Mark Viverito when she was the speaker. And we have fought incredibly hard for increases. There are differences in those programs, and I think we want to continue to see increases in both of them. Obviously, there are members of the Coalition of Theaters of Color that serve immigrant communities as well. And it is a diverse coalition that is getting even more diverse as we increase the number of groups within the Coalition of Theaters of Color. But the Cultural Immigrant Initiative is one where it's member driven, member allocated. Each member gets an equal amount of funding to distribute. Coalition of Theaters of Color is allocated in a slightly different way that involves the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus, the budget negotiating team, the Speaker's office. So I want to increase all of those streams as much as I possibly can, and that's what I do every year in the BNT. So my goal this year would be to see massive increases to both of them as well. Obviously, we are in a different reality, and I certainly don't know what we're going to be faced with, but I'm still going to go in there and fight for massive increases to them.
Go ahead, Athena, or does somebody else want to answer that?
Madam Councilwoman Inez Dickens, we've invited her to speak if she'd like to speak now. Noel, do you see her?
I do not.
Okay, we will continue. She will join us again if available.
Let me say this. If she is on the phone, we will ask her to hit *6 to unmute. So,
okay.
Council member, if you've dialed in through the phone, hit *6 on your phone to unmute yourself.
Okay, and as we're doing that, Joyous, if you would please proceed with the next question.
No problem. So the next question is from Eileen Berry, and it says, hello, and hope all are staying safe and well in body and spirit. I'm writing from the National Dance Institute. We have our home and studios in Central Harlem and serve NYC Public Schools as a nonprofit vendor organization. We and other arts orgs are receiving many mixed messages about whether or not the DOE will be able to honor our contracts with schools beyond the March 16th closure, even though we are working with our partner school leadership to provide remote learning opportunities to our school communities and students and keep our children dancing. Is there any news about whether or not arts orgs and other DOE vendors will be compensated for the services we are continuing to provide, though remotely, through our contracts?
That's still your question. If you have the ability, I don't know how much we know already, but is there something you can shed light on?
Gail, who were you addressing that to? You were muted when you first started talking.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm to the council member. Yeah, council member.
Councilmember Van Bramer, are you
Yes.
still around? There you are.
Yeah, he's still
There
here.
you are.
Sure. So we have been talking with the acting Cultural Affairs Commissioner Kathy Hughes on an almost daily basis to make sure that grants that have already been granted are fully paid out in the current fiscal year. And we have an agreement from the Department of Cultural Affairs on that. As you all know, the Department of Education is a different beast altogether and has some different controls around DOE specific cultural funding. So we don't yet know all the answers to that particular piece, but we continue to talk to the DOE and are continuing to push for everything to be paid out in the current year, and particularly those services that are being performed, even if they're being performed in a way that's different than they were intended to be or funded initially to be because of the disruption of school in general and the ways in which cultural programming in schools is able to be performed.
All right, that's very helpful. We can try to get answers even beyond that for the folks who were just not able to, because that's a DOE challenge, shall we say. Okay, so the next question.
Yes.
No problem. The next question is from Heather Godfrey, and she says, we typically have to get reimbursed by the city for programming and rely on earned income to bridge the gap while we wait for that. Will the city change the way funds are distributed so that we can continue to provide programming to our participants while being unable to charge tuition for those programs?
Oh, it might be back to the
So I
council
think
member.
this is one of the, yep, This is one of the most frustrating things that I have had to deal with as chair of the committee, now over 3 different commissioners. And we as council continue to impress upon the Department of Cultural Affairs to release the funding immediately. And as all of you probably on this call have experienced personally, receiving funding that was awarded when the budget was adopted in June, in December, or even later, is one that forces organizations to take out bridge loans or to do other things, even if they can't do that, just to simply survive, to float the program along. So I know this is one of the biggest issues that we face, and we had made some progress. I thought we fell back this year, I think in part because of the transition with Commissioner Finkelpearl leaving, and not having a commissioner or a permanent commissioner. Obviously we have an acting commissioner in Kathy Hughes, but we've got to do better. The Department of Cultural Affairs has got to release the funding that the mayor allocates, quite frankly, and they've got it to these arts organizations as quickly as possible. All I can say is that Gonzalo Casals, who worked at a number of cultural organizations in the city of New York, I hope is, and I expect to be very sensitive to this. We've got to get the money out quicker to all these organizations, particularly the smallest ones, desperately who need it. I represent the Thalia Spanish Theater. Thalia Spanish Theater in Sunnyside is one of the most important institutions in the world, as far as I'm concerned, and a member of both the Coalition of Theaters of Color, but also a recipient of a number of grants from the council. And I talk to Angel all the time about how frustrating it is because it takes so long for that money to actually get drawn down. So you have my commitment that we'll work with Gonzalo and DCLA to try and make it a process that actually works for small, particularly small arts organizations.
Okay. I know that Clayton Banks is now available, if you want him to speak.
Yes. Yes. Go ahead, Clayton.
Everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, very good. I'm using my mobile. Just quickly, first of all, I just am so impressed with the Borough President's Office holding these sessions, particularly around arts and culture. I'm dying because I wasn't able to see the new Bond movie coming out. It's been postponed till November, so I'm pissed off about that. But I'm also missing a whole lot of other things. Just from a tech perspective, and I know Hidalgo's on here too, so I think a lot of us in the tech community are thinking of what are not only the solutions, but what are some opportunities, and that's when we're being challenged about, thinking about the future, because this coronavirus is just one of many disasters to come, and we want to make sure that we're trying to future-proof arts and culture in a lot of ways. And I think part of it will be innovation. And I'm saying that because for those who are on this call who are artists, who are producing and making and dreaming and thinking of things, I think this is going to open up a whole new channel when you look at sort of the way we have to look at things, right? Whether it's from home or remotely or however we're working, and the new ways that we're going to be living, the new normals. One of them is just how a city sounds, right? So you start thinking about what are the new sounds of a city? What's the new look of a city? And I think there's some real creativity around that needs to be born, and the technology that now allows you to get that out quickly can actually be tied to a business model, to where the arts and culture has always struggled from a financial perspective in the small areas in whole. But I think there's new ways to now create real revenue, and I'll be sharing that as we go on with these town halls. But I've seen projects already in other parts of the world where they will sit down in the middle of the city and just record something, right? And just start to put new ways of listening and new ways of absorbing some of the arts and culture. Because we compare it a lot to sports. Right now, some of us are sports fans, and we're not seeing any sports right now. We're all upset about that. So there's a lot of technology being poured into the sports arena in order for us to see virtual competition to keep us engaged. And I think arts and culture has that same potential. And like I said on previous town hall, that I would love to continue to consult with anybody, and I've been able to do that with a couple of people on this call. So that's my first and only thing I'm going to say right now, because there's so much more to it, and I think Q&A will probably be a better way to get it all out of me.
Thank you so much, Clayton.
Yeah, Athena, I know there are a lot of calls and questions about funding.
Yes.
But I was
Yes.
just wondering if Professor Wu could, because we have to think of ideas that are outside the box. And
Yes,
I'm just
exactly.
wondering if either Professor Wu or anybody else could help us think about some of these ideas that might be outside the box. Tim, I don't know if you want to respond to what Clayton had to say.
Yes,
Go ahead.
No, just to add to that, Borough President, that individual artists who are on the line want to know, what they can specifically do, right?
Look, I think it's a tough question, and I wish I had the answer. I think so. One thing I'll say: there are groups. This isn't a substitute for making money through performance. But I know that there's private groups who are starting to set up programs. A lot of them go really quickly to try to support groups that are in specific categories out there, and we have a big list of them. You can find lists out there. So there's some people just doing grants just to help particular groups. But in terms of creating a model, I think that is something that really could get started, really needs to get started. We have programs already that are trying to help, for example, restaurants through gift card, people going out and buying gift cards and just doing tiny little things to try and help. But I don't think the same level of awareness is out there with people who are involved in the arts. I think, like with sports, it's just kind of like, people are struggling with a lot of things, but I think that it's worth, and I don't have the magic bullet solution, but trying to figure out an easy equivalent, a little bit like a gift card. The way people are buying gift cards for restaurants as a way of giving them money. And if there were a way people could easily support the arts with something like the gift cards program, where we don't have to invent entirely new technology, just make an easy way for people to throw money at what they want to help out, which are artists in their neighborhood or artists or organizations, even individuals. You can find a way to do that. That's really important. I wish I had a borough president, and come up with a gizmo that would make that all happen, but I don't have it with me right now in my room here.
Well, that's an idea, and I appreciate it. Something to think about with both the Harlem and Washington Heights groups. And like I said, I'm a fan of Boza River, so I know he will take it and run with it. Athena, go back. I don't know how much more time, maybe 10 more minutes that we have. We'll keep
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. So we have a question about how to innovate and have outside of the box ideas shared so that we don't leave behind our most under-resourced audiences. Some of us serve mostly low-income families who are in danger of being left out. This could be for any of the panelists to respond.
Let's see, Joy, yes, you're good at this. What do you come up with? I know you're good at this.
Unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Gail, for your trust in my expertise in this area. It's appreciated. I think that communication is the first step. I think a wonderful example of areas of communication that have been open. One example that a lot of you participated in it is the Uptown Arts and Culture Resource Survey. Figuring out what exactly the people that you're serving, the artists that you're serving, communities that you're serving need, is the first step. And then after that, using whatever networks and like relationships that you have to try to get rid of the hurdles that might be in the way of providing those resources. So really communication about what the needs are is key.
Okay, and Neria, do you also have some ideas? Because I know both of you run umbrella groups, and so you may have some ideas also.
Sorry, sorry, I'm having some trouble with my Wi-Fi. It's a little bit in and out tonight. Okay. Yeah, I think communication, and I also think sort of trying to find a way to think, you know, and I love that idea of the gift cards for artists. You know, how do we think about, you know, any number, and you know, small or large, you know, even the GoFundMe's and that concept, you know, I think resonates with people, because I think people sometimes they have a passion. I don't think their wallets always correspond to their passion, but if there are enough of those people who have a passion and we can do something small, you know, it's a drop in the bucket, but before you know it, you know, the bucket's overflowing with water. And I think that's an important way to look at this. And so, you know, Margaret was talking about before, you know, how can big institutions, anchor institutions, work with small institutions? How can we all kind of at different times continue to sort of pull each other along, you know, as we continue to try to build something big among us. And I think that it's important. There's no idea that I think is too small to give consideration to. So I think to the extent that we can, you know, Joyce, to your point, communicate these big and small. I think we do a service to our communities, to one another. And, you know, as we've all sort of said, you know, and we sort of said this at the beginning, this city depends on arts and culture. We're not marginal. We're not an afterthought. We are the heart and soul of the city. And I think that if we internalize that, you know, we can move forward in that way. And we just need to sort of internalize that, continue to reinforce that, and share these ideas, to your point, Joyce, sort of big and small with one another.
And I'll chime in. I completely agree, and Nydia and Joyce, and I think there's opportunity. I mean, there are some models. I was in part of a panel, and I wish I would remember the name, but there's an organization that they bring music to seniors, to people who are homebound. One by one, they send classical artists. They hire tons of artists, and they literally do a one-person concert in a living room for somebody who cannot leave their home. So I think we need to rethink, and looking at Heather's question, how do we make sure that our audiences who are most marginalized, because a lot of our community, immigrant communities of different statuses who may not have internet, a lot of these new technologies may not work for them, but why don't we re-envision that really the funding is going to go so that we go to living rooms of our families and do a performance there or sing for them there. This is theater, right? We all clap at 7 p.m. every day in New York City. We are creating theater, we need it, right? And that's building community across with our neighbors. So how can we look at the lessons of that and just the funding community, the city, but also us as creatives of being like, well, this year our season is we're going to 10 people's homes and bringing art, you know? And then we share that with those who do have access to the internet. So I think being creative in that way is also important.
Yeah, if I may add something to that, I think you talk about innovation, it's not just innovation and funding, it's also being innovative in your programming and like, what is a season anymore? You know what I mean? Like how can anyone, subscription model is out the window right at this moment in time, or maybe it's not in a smarter way. But I think you know, we have to think about, again, what's next, and the scalability and the accessibility of saying, great, so I have this show, and is it a turnkey? Like, can you, going back to the European model of producing theater, it's like you have the show, okay, let's do Richard III. We have these people. This is how we do Richard III. We're going to do this. You know, I think there are ways of innovating and saying, how can we do this? How can we do a pop-up movie theater? How can we do, because as people know, this could go in seasons. We could see 2 more seasons of COVID-19 or whatever it is. And we have to be nimble, and we have to find a degree of flexibility. And at the same time is be fiscally responsible to ourselves. Our funders they've been very nice to us. You heard Blair, you heard everyone, UCLA, everyone wants to work with us. I think everyone understands. NISCA has been very forgiving. Everyone kind of gets it. And I think it's going to be interesting to see from a funding point of view too, how it's going to affect, because those poor people doing those final reports are just going to be in hell. So we have to all work together and figure out how this is going to be a nimble, and the word season I think is going to be redefined. But I think the thing is, it has to be redefined by us, and how our programming and how we see ourselves executing that programming, and hopefully with technology aiding us and creating that communal experience.
I just want to sorry if I can.
Go ahead, Margaret. Yeah.
I just wanted to add 2 examples. We recently, as part of our online programming, we invited we invited them and paid them, sent them a stipend, or will be sending them a stipend to perform something in their home. And Needy and I had talked about doing something similar with some of the local artists and inviting them to maybe respond to something at the Hispanic Sites collection, and using some, looking for funding to support these artists, and yet also providing, nurturing our souls to all who are remotely. So to support artists, I think we just have to be creative.
So I just want to jump in here to invite our community board leaders to also, engage in the discussion, because some of them have also put questions into the chat. Daria Hartman and George Harrell from Community Board 9 and Community Board 12, and Liz Ritter from Community Board, 9, 10, and 12. Liz Ritter is on with us as well. And they want to know about what actions can they take from their perspective, policy making and other kinds of collaborative efforts. Could any of you speak to that, please?
Boza, do you want to try to answer that? You're good at this, Boza.
I think that this conversation was to share information and not have all the answers. We have been on the conference call now for an hour and a half. We have reached our maximum. This gives us food for thought on how we can proceed further. We're not going to be able to give an answer, but to have Community Board 9, 10, and 12 all on this call says that we can have an additional conversation, not as large as this, but where we can be talking to each other and listening to each other and looking for a game plan that strengthens
Did we just lose you, Boza?
No, somebody muted Boza.
Okay.
Boza, unmute yourself, please.
Okay, while he's unmuting, I just want to acknowledge and thank Tim Wu, who is going to have to leave us. And we have about 5 or so more minutes for the conclusion of this conversation. But Tim, is there any final thought that you want to add?
I think he left.
Okay. All right. Very good. So please continue.
So I just wanted to just really wrap up and to thank everyone for their attention to this situation that we are all living in, which is our new norm. As we look forward, there are going to be many more conversations, but what we really wanted to get from this on our side is a sense of having people ask the chair of arts and culture for the city of New York, who's been very dedicated to arts and culture for the last 11 years. We don't want to put Jimmy Van Bramer on the line, because what he is saying is what he knows and what is. We do live in a political situation, and there are a lot of nuances, and there has to be a sophistication of understanding when we do what we do. We don't have all the answers, but what we do have is the ability to bring groups together, to have conversations, and out of these conversations, we're looking for an opportunity to solve and move forward. Let me just close on my end by saying a thank you to Athena, Neria, Joyous, Donna, Linda Walton, of course, Joyous Pierce, and Professor Wu, Clayton Banks. Again, Jimmy Van Bramer, thank you. And to Gail Brewer, thanks, Gail, for being our partner on this.
And I thank you so much, Boza. Just want to add that before we turn it to Gail and final comments, just that you have groups on like National Dance Institute, Harlem Crawl, Art Crawl Harlem, as well as groups that we know who want to, Yafa Cultural Arts and others, the Jazz Fest, who want to know about how other foundations will be engaged. So not talking about public sector, but private sector, specifically UMES and some of the others. Are you going to engage groups like the Mellon Foundation or Gilman or other philanthropic entities?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can try just talk about that a little bit, because my focus, as much as I appreciate and just in awe of all of this amazing creative talent, you need money. And to me, that's where the bottom line is. And so I actually spent some time today calling some of the foundations. I did speak to some of the people you just mentioned, as well as the USA Artists, which gives money to individuals. And we all have to focus on the PPP. I can't tell you that there's going to be more of that consortium, which is the Mellon and the Robin Hood and the Ford and the Bloomberg. And that's the one that has 846 applications. They were all due yesterday, and they'll be basically until May 2nd, they'll be making decisions. I know some Upper Manhattan have gotten funding, and hopefully more will between now and May 2nd. So I asked, will there be another round of philanthropy from that particular consortium? And quote unquote, if there isn't more money, I doubt it. So that's why I keep focusing on something that we're gonna have to come up with. It's not city, state, or federal, even though we should push on all those fronts. So I'm here to say thank you to everybody who participates, Council Member Athena, certainly Boza Rivers, and all the amazing people who spoke, moderated and spoke. If you stand back and you listen to what you have to offer, I think people would say you are the heart and soul of this city, every single way. So it's my job and others to try to figure out how to make that a reality. New world, new ideas, certainly the ones that Professor Wu came up with, and others, we need to consider them, because, you know, we watch stuff on the, people are making money from the arts in different kinds of ways, and the Upper Manhattan should be doing the same. So I'm here to say we will get answers. Athena and I and others will go through the questions, and even though we don't have time tonight, because we could be here all night, getting,
Gail,
we will get answers to your
I want to interrupt you, because I want to say to you, thank you on behalf of all of our cultural institutions, our not-for-profits, and our churches, because they have all been affected negatively. They're not getting the assistance that they need. And if it were not for you taking the forefront of the fight and the lead, this would not be done. So I just wanted to say to you, thank you.
As Assemblymember Dickens, we're the ones who should be thanking you over and over again. So I know Boza Rivers is the one I'm thanking, but I'm certainly thanking you, my friend. And we're all in this together. There's no one way to answer this question about supporting the arts and the nonprofits. Mm-hmm. So we're in this together. And thank you very much. And I think those are the greatest words. Go ahead. But I would say those are my ending words, are thank you, and we will find a way to answer your questions. And if it's okay with Boza Rivers, at some point, I think we should have another conversation, maybe when we've investigated some of the questions and find answers. And thank you, my friend from Queens, and thank you, Jimmy Ben Bremer.
So Gail, as you close, just one last thing. This is a little non-traditional, but we have asked everyone to focus on their continued healing and wellness. And I just want to call your attention to the chat that Nafisa Sharif has offered her daily meditation for artist communities who would like to participate. So we thank you again, and please check the chat, and we look forward to continued conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
everyone.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
councilors.
Good night.
Gail, you the best.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank
you.